The night pulsed with an ancient hunger. Beneath the crimson glow of the blood moon, the blackwood wilds whispered with unseen voices, the wind carrying the scent of something forbidden. The trees stood as silent witnesses to a hunt that had already begun. Raven Nightbane crouched low on the jagged cliffside, golden eyes burning like twin embers against the darkness. He had tracked her scent for miles. Velvet and death, frost and fire. It called to something primal within him, something no battle, no bloodshed, had ever stirred before. She was close. His claws tightened against the cold stone as he inhaled deeply. Vampire, but not just any. This scent was unlike the others, more intoxicating, more dangerous. And then he saw her. Celine Dravenheart moved like a ghost through the trees, her form bathed in silver and shadow. She did not run. She did not fear. She walked with the grace of something untouchable, something born of midnight and tragedy. Her gown, dark as spilled ink, clung to her figure, shifting with each step as though darkness itself obeyed her. Long silver-white hair cascaded over her shoulders, framing a face so breathtakingly perfect it could drive even the strongest men to ruin. Raven's pulse pounded like war drums. She was hunting, but so was he. She paused, tilted her head ever so slightly. "You've followed me long enough, Wolf." Her voice was silk and steel, neither afraid nor welcoming. Raven stepped forward, slow and deliberate, letting the moonlight carve his figure from the shadows. He was built like a predator, tall, broad, his body honed by war. Dark hair fell past his shoulders, wild and untamed, framing sharp, unforgiving features. Scars lined his arms, his hands, trophies of battles won. But his eyes, they gleamed with something more, something deeper. "Did you come to kill me, vampire?" His voice was low, rough, the kind that crawled under the skin, and stayed there. Celine turned to face him fully, her crimson eyes smoldering. "If I had, you would already be dead." A dark smirk tugged at Raven's lips. Bold, lethal, exquisite. She moved closer, gliding across the earth like she belonged to the night itself. The scent of her wrapped around him, cold, alluring, laced with danger. "You are far from your lands, werewolf. What do you want?" He could have lied, could have played the game of shadows and deception, but Raven was not like her kind. He did not weave words into traps. He took, he conquered, and gods help him. He wanted her. "I want to know why you smell like fate," he murmured, voice dark and possessive. Something flickered in Celine's eyes, something sharp and unreadable. Then, in a blur of motion, she was in front of him, so close he could feel the cold kiss of her breath against his skin. "And I want to know," she whispered, her fingers ghosting just over his chest, "why you do not fear me." Raven's hand shot out, catching her wrist before she could retreat. Their touch ignited something unseen, something forbidden. The air crackled. Power hummed between them. He pulled her closer just enough that the space between them thinned to nothing but heat and unspoken war. "Because fear," he rasped, his lips barely a breath from hers, "is for those who have something to lose." Her smile was wicked. "Then you should fear me, Wolf, because you are about to lose everything." The wind howled through the trees. The blood moon blazed overhead. And in that moment, the world itself seemed to hold its breath. Two predators, two curses, one fate, and neither of them would ever be the same again. The wind carried the scent of her, wild roses and winter frost, laced with the metallic whisper of death. Raven Nightbane moved through the shadows, his powerful frame gliding effortlessly over the broken earth. The Blackwood wilds had never felt so silent, so charged. Somewhere ahead, she was waiting. Celine Dravenheart stood at the heart of the clearing, motionless, the moonlight wrapping around her like a lover's embrace. Her silver-white hair cascaded down her back, stirring in the cool breeze, the strands catching the dying light like threads of liquid starlight. She was still, eerily so, her crimson eyes half-lidded as if lost in thought. But Raven knew better. She was listening, hunting, for him. He stepped forward, deliberate, letting her hear his approach, letting her feel him coming closer. He did not lurk in the shadows like her kind. He did not hide. He was the storm before the strike, and he wanted her to know it. Celine turned slowly, her lips curling into something just shy of a smirk. "You followed me again," she murmured, the melody of her voice both chilling and intoxicating. Raven halted mere steps from her, his golden eyes blazing. "You didn't run fast enough." Her laugh was quiet, a whisper of silk sliding against steel. "And if I had?" His smirk was dark, dangerous. "Then I would have chased you." She tilted her head, watching him, as though weighing the truth in his words. Then, with a slow grace that sent heat coursing through his veins, she took a step closer. Raven should have stepped back, should have put distance between them, between the scent of her, the pull of her. But he didn't. He held his ground, his muscles coiled, his breathing slow and steady. "You're different," she murmured, her gaze studying him as though peeling back his very soul. Raven arched a brow. "You sound surprised." "I am." Her fingertips ghosted over his arm, a touch so feather-light it was almost maddening. Cold against heat, death against life. Raven's jaw clenched. He was not a man who bent, not a creature that submitted, but God's, the way her presence crawled under his skin, like a blade kissed by moonlight, carving itself deep. "Tell me, Wolf," Celine whispered, stepping even closer, "why does my presence not repulse you?" He caught her wrist in a swift, unyielding grip, not harsh, not cruel, but enough to let her feel the power beneath his touch, enough to tell her that he was no trembling fool caught in a vampire's web. Her lips parted slightly, her breath cool against his skin. "You don't repulse me, Celine." His voice was low, rough, like embers smoldering in the dark. "You consume me." Something flickered in her crimson eyes, something sharp, unspoken, dangerous. She should have pulled away. He should have let go. But neither of them moved. The silence between them grew thick, heavy, the tension wrapping around them like an unspoken vow. The air itself trembled, as if the very world knew that this was a moment that should not be, a connection that defied all reason. Celine exhaled slowly, her gaze never leaving his. Then, with a quiet, knowing smile, she leaned in. Her lips brushed the corner of his jaw. Soft, cold, a phantom's kiss. A warning. A challenge. "You play with fire, Wolf," she whispered against his skin. Raven's grip on her wrist tightened, his other hand rising, fingers tracing the curve of her throat, feeling the wild pulse beneath her marble skin. His voice was barely more than a growl. "Then burn me, vampire." A sharp inhale, a flicker of something dangerous in her eyes. And just like that, she was gone. The wind carried nothing but the ghost of her scent, her presence vanishing into the night. Raven exhaled slowly, dragging his tongue across his teeth as he stared at the empty space where she had stood. A slow, knowing smirk curled his lips. Let her run. Because this time, when he chased her, she would not escape. The night was restless. Shadows twisted beneath the towering ruins of Blackthorn Keep, where time had long abandoned its claim. The air was thick with the scent of old magic, the kind that slumbered beneath stone and waited for foolish hands to wake it. Raven Nightbane prowled through the forgotten halls, golden eyes flickering in the dim glow of torches long extinguished. He had followed her scent here, deep, rich, laced with the intoxicating danger only Celine Dravenheart possessed. She had left him wanting. Twice. That would not happen again. A sound, soft, deliberate, brushed against the silence. His head snapped toward the archway ahead. There. Celine stood at the edge of the chamber, bathed in the silver touch of moonlight streaming through the broken ceiling. Her gown, sheer and flowing, kissed the stone as she moved, as if darkness itself wished to be worn by her. "You don't give up, do you?" she murmured, voice like a midnight hymn. Raven took a slow, measured step forward. Not when something is mine. A sharp, amused breath left her lips. Yours. She turned, facing him fully, her crimson gaze meeting his. It should have burned, that look. Should have withered him like fire-devouring paper. Instead, it called to something buried deep, something that no battle, no bloodshed, had ever reached. His chest rose with a slow inhale. I've tasted war. I've hunted beasts far greater than you. And yet, he took another step, his presence thick, commanding. You are the only thing I cannot walk away from. Celine tilted her head, a slow smile curving her lips. Then perhaps you should run instead, Wolf. Raven smirked. You'd only chase me. She laughed, dark and knowing. Maybe. Then, in a breath, she was upon him. No sound, no warning. Just a blur of silver hair, ice-cold fingers grazing his throat before he slammed her back against the ancient stone wall. Dust trembled from the impact, but Celine showed no fear. If anything, her smile widened, sharp and wicked. Strong, she purred. But tell me, Raven. Her nails traced along the hard planes of his chest, teasing, dangerous. Are you strong enough to resist me? Raven growled, low and deep. Why would I want to? Her laughter ghosted against his skin, a whisper of silk and death. Then don't. His grip tightened around her wrists, pinning them above her head. Their bodies were too close, heat clashing against ice, breath mingling between them. Her pulse, though slow, controlled, was there beneath his fingers, a steady rhythm calling to something primal in him. You're playing a dangerous game, vampire, he rasped. Celine leaned in, her lips just shy of touching his. And you're breaking the rules, Wolf. The air between them shifted. A sudden force rippled, unseen but felt, threading through his skin, his bones. A searing heat coiled around them, ancient, binding. Celine's smirk faltered. A sharp breath left her lips. Raven stiffened, every muscle in his body locking as pain, white-hot and merciless, lanced through his chest. Then it marked them. A burning sigil seared into the skin above his heart, its twin appearing on Celine's collarbone in a flash of silver-blue light. Their bodies tensed, their breaths stolen. Magic, old, forbidden, undeniable, wrapped around them like shackles. Celine's lips parted in shock. No, Raven barely heard her. The moment her skin cooled beneath his touch, the moment her body trembled against his, he knew. The moonbound curse had awakened. He did not need a book of spells to understand what it meant. He could feel it in his blood, in his very marrow. If she ran, his soul would tear. If he left, hers would wither. Two creatures never meant to belong to each other, now cursed to never part. Celine wrenched free, staggering back, a hand pressing against the mark on her skin. Crimson eyes, normally so composed, now burned with something close to fear. Raven exhaled, rolling his shoulders, his heartbeat still a violent drum inside his chest. Then he looked at her, truly looked. You feel it too, he said, voice rough. She did not answer. She didn't have to. The silence between them was thick, heavier than ever before. This was no longer just a hunt, no longer just an obsession neither of them wanted to name. This was fate, cruel and unstoppable. Celine took another step back. Raven didn't chase her this time. Not yet. Instead, he smirked, slow and dark. Try running now, vampire, he murmured. See if I don't catch you. Her breath hitched, just slightly. Then she vanished into the night. But they both knew the truth. She could run as far as she wanted. She would never be free of him. And he would never let her go. The wind howled through the ruins of Blackthorn Keep, but Raven Nightbane barely heard it. His heartbeat was a slow, steady drum, his pulse thrumming with something ancient, something irrevocable. The moonbound curse. It still burned against his skin, a brand of fate he never asked for. The mark bound him to her. Celine Dravenheart, the vampire he should have hated, should have destroyed. Instead, she had become his obsession, a ghost in his mind even when she vanished into the night. But she was not truly gone. Raven could feel her, even now. The bond whispered of her presence, of her cold fire and impossible beauty. She was running, hiding. He smirked. Let her try. With effortless grace, he prowled through the trees, his movements silent, predatory. The forest bent to him, the shadows parting, the ground yielding. He did not chase her in anger. He chased her because he had no choice. Celine was his now, whether she accepted it or not. And she knew it. The dance of shadows. Deep within the heart of the forest, Celine leaned against a tree, eyes burning with frustration. She pressed her fingers against the mark on her collarbone, as if she could erase it. It was impossible. The sigil was seared into her very essence, chaining her to a beast, to a creature born of the wild, one she should never have touched. She had spent centuries untethered, belonging to no one. And yet, with a single reckless night, she had been claimed. Her breath was steady, but her hands curled into fists. She would not surrender to him. Then, the night shifted. A low growl rolled through the trees, deep and rough, sending a shiver down her spine. She straightened, eyes flashing. He was here. A shadow moved between the trees, tall, strong, deliberate. The golden gleam of his eyes cut through the darkness, locking onto her with an intensity that sent heat curling through her veins. Celine smirked. You tracked me quickly, wolf. Raven stepped forward, slow, powerful, his presence thick with authority. You knew I would. His voice was deep, edged with something dark. He did not ask why she ran. He did not demand answers. He did not need to. Celine lifted her chin. What do you want? Raven chuckled, low and dangerous. Do you really not know? She hated the way his voice stirred something inside her, hated the way her body reacted to him, despite everything. Raven took another step forward, closing the distance between them. This curse, his fingers brushed against the mark on her collarbone, sending a shudder through her body. It does not care what we want. It only knows what we are. Celine clenched her jaw. And what are we, wolf? Raven's gaze darkened, bound. The moment stretched, heavy and electric. She should have pulled away, should have resisted. Instead, she held her ground, even as his touch lingered against her skin. I will not be owned, she whispered, voice sharp but breathless. Raven's smirk was slow, knowing. I do not want to own you, Celine. His voice dropped lower, almost a growl. I want you to yield. Her breath hitched. Before she could speak, he moved. One moment he stood before her. The next, she was against the tree, his body pinning hers in place. Not cruel, not forceful, but unyielding. His heat seeped into her, his strength caging her in. And gods, she should have fought him, but the bond between them would not allow it. Raven leaned in, his lips grazing just beside her ear. Deny it all you want, but you feel this just as I do. You are mine, Celine. A shiver raced down her spine, a mix of fury and desire. Her fingers clenched against his chest. You are playing with fire, wolf. Raven exhaled, his breath teasing her skin. Then let it burn. For a moment, she almost gave in, almost let the curse take its claim. Then with a sudden burst of strength, she shoved him back, her breath uneven. This changes nothing. Raven only grinned, golden eyes gleaming. Keep telling yourself that, vampire. Celine vanished into the night. But this time, she did not run. Because deep down, she knew she would see him again. And next time, she might not resist. The night stretched deep, cloaked in silver moonlight and whispers of fate. The storm that had threatened the sky never came, leaving the air thick with a tension that refused to break. Somewhere in the vast darkness, the world slept, but not them. Raven found her again. He had known he would. The bond between them was no longer just a whisper. It was a roar inside his chest, a primal pull that neither of them could silence. No matter how far she ran, no matter how fiercely she denied it, she belonged to him now. And she hated it. Celine stood at the edge of an abandoned watchtower, overlooking the valley below. Her silver-white hair danced with the wind, her gown rippling like a specter's veil. She had sensed his approach but did not turn. "Still chasing me, Wolf?" Her voice was cool, controlled. Raven smirked. "Still pretending you don't want to be caught?" At that, she glanced over her shoulder, crimson eyes gleaming. "You overestimate yourself." He stepped forward, slow, deliberate. The old wooden planks beneath them groaned under his weight, but he was steady, unshaken. His gaze burned into her. "And you underestimate fate." Celine exhaled, her fingers curling against the stone railing. She had spent centuries untouched by fate, unclaimed by anything but the darkness she called home. But now, this curse, the bond, was an iron shackle around her soul. Raven stopped just behind her, close enough for her to feel his heat, close enough that their worlds seemed to fold into one. "Tell me to leave," he murmured. Celine's breath stilled. It would be so simple. A single command, a single refusal, and he would go. He had given her that choice before. He would give it again. But she didn't say it. Because deep down, beneath her pride, beneath centuries of solitude, she did not want him to leave. Raven's fingers brushed against her wrist. A mere touch, barely there, but it sent fire through her veins. "You feel it, don't you?" His voice was low, dangerous. "This isn't just magic, Celine. It's us." Her lashes fluttered, her lips parting slightly. His presence was suffocating, intoxicating. A storm she had no power to control. She turned then, slowly, her face now inches from his. "Do not mistake this curse for something real, Raven." He tilted his head, golden eyes gleaming. "A curse wouldn't make your heart race." His fingers traced up her arm, slow, deliberate, until they rested against the mark on her collarbone. He felt the sharp inhale she tried to suppress. Celine's expression remained impassive, but her body betrayed her. The bond between them was like a living thing, thrumming, hungry, undeniable. She could feel his pulse, a steady, powerful rhythm. And it called to her. Raven watched her, waiting, daring her to deny what was happening between them. Finally, Celine's gaze softened, but only for a flicker of a moment. "You are dangerous, Wolf." Raven smirked. "And you are lethal, Vampire." Celine exhaled, something unreadable flashing in her eyes. Then, before she could think, before she could stop herself, she leaned in, just enough for her lips to brush against his. A feather-like touch, cold against heat. Raven froze, not out of hesitation, not out of doubt, but because the moment was shattering. A war that had been fought between them had just shifted, not lost, not won, but changed. Celine pulled back, her expression unreadable. Then she whispered, "This changes nothing." Raven exhaled slowly, his smirk dark, knowing. "We'll see." The bond between them hummed, alive and hungry. And deep down, they both knew there would be no escaping it now. The sky bowled into deep shades of violet as night stretched its fingers over the land. A restless wind moved through the ancient trees, whispering secrets only the cursed could hear. And beneath that eternal sky, they stood on the brink of something neither could escape. Raven had never known restraint. Until her. Celine had ignited something within him. A hunger, a fury, an obsession. And now, after centuries of belonging to nothing, of answering to no one, she was bound to him, just as he was bound to her. By fate, by fire, by a curse neither of them had chosen. And yet, he did not want to fight it. Celine, however, did. She stood at the edge of the clearing, her silver-white hair cascading down her back, her lips set in a line of quiet defiance. She had run from him, challenged him, even drawn her blade against him. But now, with the night pressing in, there was nowhere left to hide. Raven moved closer, his steps slow, deliberate. He did not need to chase her. She was already his. Her crimson eyes flickered up to meet his, cold and sharp. "Do you think cornering me will make me yield?" Raven smirked. "No." His voice was dark, edged with something raw. "But I think you're already considering it." A breath hitched in her throat. So soft, so quick, that any lesser man would have missed it. But Raven was not a lesser man. He was a hunter. Celine exhaled, tilting her chin. "This bond means nothing." Raven chuckled, the sound low and rough. "Then why do you tremble when I'm near?" She did not tremble. She refused to. But her body betrayed her, as it always did when he was close, when his presence wrapped around her like a storm she could not outrun. Raven stepped forward again, closing the space between them, until the heat of his body brushed against hers. He reached out, slow, careful, fingertips grazing her wrist, feeling the cold fire beneath her skin. Celine did not pull away. Instead, her lips parted, her breath uneven. His golden eyes darkened. "You are fighting a war you've already lost, vampire." Celine's jaw clenched, but she made no move to break free. His hand slid higher, his fingers pressing against the mark that bound them. She gasped. The reaction was instant. Fire surged through both of them. Not pain, but something deeper, something ancient. The mark pulsed, sealing them in a force beyond their control. Raven's smirk faded. "You feel it," he murmured. "This isn't just magic, Celine. This is us." Her gaze burned into his, unreadable, unyielding. "You think I will surrender to you?" Raven exhaled slowly, his thumb brushing against her pulse. "No." He leaned in, his breath teasing the edge of her jaw. "I think you will surrender to yourself." Celine's lips parted, her breath uneven. For a moment, just a moment, her fingers curled against his chest, as if testing the strength that had haunted her since the night they met. Then, with a sharp inhale, she wrenched free. The moment shattered. She stepped back, her eyes flashing. "This means nothing," she whispered, almost as if trying to convince herself. Raven watched her, his smirk slow, knowing. "Then why are you running?" Celine's breath caught. And just like that, she was gone. A streak of silver and shadow, lost to the night. Raven did not follow. He did not need to. Because next time, she would not run. Next time, she would come to him. And when she did, there would be no turning back. The wind carried her scent. Raven stood at the edge of the ruined cathedral, the night wrapping around him like a second skin. His body was tense, his breath slow. She was near. For days, Celine had avoided him. For nights, he had let her. But the bond between them was relentless, a chain neither of them could break. And now, as the moonlight bathed the shattered stone in silver, he felt her presence like a phantom touch against his skin. She was coming to him. He turned just as she stepped into view. Celine Dravenhart, the woman who haunted his every thought. She moved like liquid shadow, her silver hair flowing in the midnight breeze, her crimson eyes gleaming with something dangerous. But tonight, she did not look like the untouchable queen of the damned. Tonight, she looked unsteady. Raven's golden eyes burned as he watched her, his body a coiled force of raw hunger. She had fought this, fought him. But she had always known it was a battle she could not win. Now she was here. And she was his. Celine stopped just a breath away, staring at him with a fire that burned too brightly. "I should kill you for what you've done to me." Raven smirked. "Then why haven't you?" Silence stretched between them, thick with something heavier than words. Celine's hands curled into fists, her nails biting into her palms. "This curse, this bond, it's tearing me apart." Raven stepped forward, closing the last of the space between them. He could feel the coldness of her skin, the sharp inhale she tried to suppress. His voice was low, rough. "It's not the bond that's tearing you apart, Celine. It's you." Her breath hitched, her crimson gaze flickering with something wild. Denial, desire, fear. She hated that he was right. Raven reached out, his fingers grazing her jaw. She didn't pull away. His voice was a whisper of dark promise. Stop running. Celine's breath trembled, her body betraying her. I can't. Raven's grip tightened, just enough to hold her there, to make her feel it. The heat between them, the war inside her. Then why are you here? She didn't answer. Because they both knew the truth. She wanted him. Celine clenched her jaw, her voice breaking. I am not yours, Wolf. Raven exhaled slowly, his lips just inches from hers. Say it again. Celine opened her mouth, then stopped. She couldn't. The words refused to come. Raven's smirk was slow, knowing. His fingers traced the mark on her collarbone, and she shivered. You belong to me, Celine, he murmured, just as I belong to you. Her lashes fluttered, her body caught in a storm she could no longer control. Then, finally, she broke. With a sharp breath, she closed the distance between them. Her lips crashed against his, cold against heat, fire against ice. Raven growled low in his throat, his arms wrapping around her, claiming her as she had already claimed him. There was no hesitation, no restraint, only the undeniable truth that had always been between them. Celine's fingers tangled in his hair, pulling him closer, deeper. She had fought him, fought this. But now, she surrendered. The night howled around them, but neither of them cared. Because for the first time since the curse bound them together, they stopped fighting fate and let it consume them. The night stretched endless above them, a vast canvas of silver and shadow. The wind carried the scent of storm and earth, mingling with something darker, something claimed. Celine stood against the ruins, her breath uneven, her crimson eyes wide with the weight of what she had done. She had surrendered, and now she could never take it back. Raven towered before her, golden eyes burning with something primal, something undeniable. He had waited for this, for her, knowing that no force, not even her own will, could keep her from him forever. She had fought him, resisted, denied. But the moment she had touched him, the moment her lips had crashed into his, it had shattered every lie she had told herself. She was his, and she knew it. Raven reached out, his fingers grazing her jaw, gentle yet possessive. You ran from me, he murmured, his voice low, edged with something dark. And yet, here you are. Celine swallowed hard. I should have killed you. His smirk was slow, knowing. You tried. She exhaled sharply, turning her head away. But he caught her chin, forcing her to face him. Look at me, Celine. She did. And the moment their eyes met, everything else faded. The bond between them was alive, a pulsing force that coiled through their veins, refusing to be ignored. It wasn't just magic. It wasn't just fate. It was them. Celine trembled beneath his touch, her body betraying her once more. This shouldn't be possible, she whispered. A werewolf and a vampire. Raven's thumb brushed against her lips, silencing her. And yet, here we stand. A storm raged inside her, a war between what she had been and what she was becoming. But she could no longer deny the truth. She had tasted his fire, and now she would never be free of it. Celine's breath hitched as Raven leaned in, his lips just inches from hers. Tell me you regret it, he whispered. Say the words, and I'll walk away. Silence. Celine's heart pounded, an impossible thing for a creature like her. She could not speak the lie. Raven's smirk deepened. That's what I thought. His mouth claimed hers again, slow and unyielding, as if branding her with every touch. She let him. No, she wanted him to. Her fingers curled against his chest, gripping the fabric of his shirt, as if anchoring herself in the storm. She had lost the battle. But in his arms, she did not feel like she had lost anything at all. When they finally broke apart, the night was breathless, the wind heavy with the weight of what had just been sealed between them. Raven's voice was hushed, dangerous. There's no turning back now, vampire. Celine met his gaze, her crimson eyes gleaming. A slow, wicked smile curved her lips. I never wanted to. And beneath the pale glow of the moon, bound by blood and fire, they stood together, unstoppable.